Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you're joining us live, super happy to have you. If at any point during the show you have any questions or comments about any of the topics that I'm going to cover, feel free to drop them in the chat. I try my best to kind of keep an eye on them. Definitely, if you have your question, try to do it earlier in the topic than later, because if I move on, and because there's maybe a 30-second delay, I might move on and you already asked your question. So definitely let us know if you have any thoughts there. If you're watching this after the fact, super happy to have you. Definitely would recommend you liking this video and subscribing, so that way you don't miss any of our live streams here. I live stream every Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And without further ado, why don't we jump in? Because what else is there to say, right? Let's jump into the first kind of thing for the show tonight. So let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. Total domestic box office from this past Easter weekend was $136 million, so a 27% jump. And if I'm not mistaken, let me kind of look it up in real time here. If I'm not mistaken, it's the biggest weekend of the year so far. Yeah, it's the biggest weekend of the year so far. Which I don't necessarily think Easter is, but Easter's much earlier this year, so maybe it's not really have anything to do with Easter. But it's a 27% jump from the previous weekend. Big factor of that, more than half of that, is coming from our number one film this weekend, Godzilla x Kong. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. Is it Godzilla meet with Kong, or anyway, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, bringing in $80 million. So this was a big overperformer. I had read that it was projected to bring in about $43 to $52 million for the weekend, so it more or less almost doubled that. So really impressive showing. Again, maybe not so impressive, in a vacuum, but compared to what people were saying it was going to make, it at least was maybe a nice surprise for, I think it's Warner Brothers, right? And it was made for about $135 million. That was its budget. And so far it's grossed about $194 million worldwide. So it's already crossed that budget number. Typically films, advertising and marketing isn't part of the budget. So they say roughly, whatever the budget is, you should double that number. And that's the number it needs to make at the box office to break even. So it's definitely gone a long way in doing that. Again, we'll see, as I say every week, we'll see kind of what the legs are on this thing. But hearing kind of the reviews, it sounds like it's kind of not, it's not being critically super well received, but normal moviegoers, I think, really like it, because in America, we love to see giant monsters punching stuff. And I don't say that in a negative light necessarily, so I think this could be not quite a sleeper hit, but I could see this, next weekend, it's worldwide hitting closer to 300. That's my prediction. Now, I'll probably forget my prediction, so, you heard it here first. So if any of you are watching and you remember this for next week, let me know if I was right or wrong. Only other things opening this week were two, I believe, Indian films. Coming in at number 8, Tilu Square, coming in at about $1.9 million. And then number 9, a film called Crew, coming in at $1.5 million. Again, I couldn't really find any info about these movies, and their budgets were in some obscure Indian currency, not even rupees. So I couldn't even really get a sense of how much they were made for versus this very small number. But it's clear that these are obviously not big ticket items, right? But this is a period of some pretty big ticket items. So films continuing this week, we have that Ghostbusters film, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, coming in at number 2 with $16 million for the weekend. Godzilla x Kong dethroned it at the top, so it dropped from first to second in its second weekend here. 65% drop, right? And I think I had said this. This is a prediction I do remember saying last week, that I wouldn't be surprised if it had a pretty big drop. Just because, again, it's these newer Ghostbuster films have not done particularly well, critically or commercially. And also, Ghostbusters is not the brand that I think Hollywood thinks it is. I just don't think it has or has ever had quite the following that they try to make it seem, in terms of how the trailers are so reverent for the Ghostbusters brand. It's this legacy sequel. So this is not surprising. I think everyone who really wanted to see it already saw it, right? So that 65% drop is not that surprising. But so far in its 2-week run now, it's made about 73 million domestically, 109 million worldwide, off of a $100 million budget. So again, it's worldwide, it's crossed that minimum budget threshold, but ideally you would want to see it hit at least 200 million worldwide to hopefully recoup some of those costs, right? Also, in its second week now is Immaculate, the Sydney Sweeney Catholic horror film, coming in at number 5, bringing in about 3.3 million for the weekend. Dropped from 4th to 5th in the second frame. I don't know if you can kind of see. If you take a look at this list, basically the list is more or less exactly the same as last week, but just everything just went down one because of Godzilla and Kong. So dropped from 4th to 5th, only a 39% drop. So again, I still have not yet seen it, but I've heard it is okay. Which is gold for a cheap horror movie kind of like this. And again, cheap. It was only made for about $9 million. But so far it's made about 11 million domestically, 13 million worldwide. So again, it's getting there. And if it kind of can hold out, in the next, even just like through April, it could be like a decent performer, for the film. And also considering Sydney Sweeney has been very successful lately, with Anyone But You, that romantic comedy she was in with Glenn Powell, doing very well considering it was a rom-com. So I would imagine a lot of this is off of just people being obsessed with Sydney Sweeney, because she's just a very prominent Gen Z actress and she's hot, right? I mean, let's just call it what it is. And I think she knows that. She's like talked about that, right? So, but however you're bringing them in, keep bringing them in, right? If I'm the people who made Immaculate. Another film continuing this week, coming at number 7, Late Night with the Devil, kind of an indie horror film, bringing in about 2.2 million. It actually held 7th place in its second frame and only had a 22% drop, which is interesting. I've heard good things. I think I'm seeing it this week, on Wednesday. So hopefully I can get you my thoughts on that. But that's a pretty decent hold. Now, again, it didn't really make a lot to begin with, right? To be fair. But again, that percentage, it's holding a little bit strong. So far, it's made about 6.3 million domestically, 6.6 million worldwide. Only other thing I wanted to mention here, so coming into over a month now at the box office is Dune Part 2. Dropping from 2nd to 3rd place now in its 5th frame, bringing in about $11 million. Only a 37% drop. Again, I've said this now more or less 5 weeks in a row. Couldn't happen to a better film. It's made about 252 million domestically, 626 million worldwide. That's huge. For comparison, the other Timothée Chalamet big money making movie Wonka, I think in its entire run, I think it's still kind of in theaters, but it's been out of the top 10 for a few weeks now. I think that made about 600 something million worldwide. And this has done that in 5 weeks or so, 4 or 5 weeks. And it was an expensive movie. It was made for $190 million. But even if you double that, it's worldwide has made that much, right? So at this point, it is a success. It'll be interesting to see how much farther it can go. It's because again, it's the playing field is going to get a lot more crowded, but people love this movie. Right? Again, like I had said when it first came out, it's not like it's going to be this huge explosive opening, but it's been holding because of that word of mouth, because it's not just like people really like it. Like, it's one of the highest rated films on Letterboxd. At least it was when I went to go see it. That may have been taken down a few notches because people, the hype was so much and people go see it and then they don't like it and they give it lower scores or what have you. But I think that word of mouth is helping and people repeat viewings. I'm just so busy at this point in my life, but if I wasn't, I would definitely go back and see it again. So maybe my fiance Viviana, if you're watching, and I know you are, we should go see it. Bug me to go see it again, and we'll go see it. And speaking of Viviana, she commented here. It seems like people are not liking Imaginary. Yeah, so Imaginary coming in at number 10, only bringing in 1.4 million for the weekend. Dropped from 8th to 10th, and it's only its 4th frame. 50% drop. Would not be surprised. It will probably not live to stay in the top 10 by come next week. But interestingly, though, so total it's made about 26 million domestically, 36 million worldwide, only off of an $11 million budget. So again, these cheap horror movies, it is one of the best business models in the industry. Is if you're a studio, you should just make like as many cheap horror films as you can. That was basically Jason Blum's strategy. So he's the founder of Blumhouse, and he has produced a bunch of horror films. He's done some other stuff, but he famously produced Paranormal Activity, right, which was super low budget, right? And his kind of business strategy was like, I'll produce and finance like 5 $1 million movies, right, or 10 or however many it is, and most of them will probably suck and or not make a lot of money, but one will hit and do really well. And by really well, make like $30 million or whatever. But off of $1 million, that's a pretty good rate of return. So it kind of pays for the whole thing. So his kind of thing is like a numbers game. Just try to get as many of these kind of cheaper films as possible. So you look at something like Imaginary, it was only made for $11 million. So it having a $36 million gross worldwide, okay, that's pretty decent. That's a pretty decent return, right? So yeah, it's definitely, people are not necessarily liking it. It has not gotten good reviews. Not surprised that it has not done, even again, off of its budget, it hasn't done particularly well. So it's not surprising that it's probably going to get knocked out of the top 10 come next week. Okay, just want to give a quick plug for some reviews that I released this past week. So Cinema QSO is not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I send out written reviews for newer films that are coming out. 2 reviews from this past week. We have here the indie kind of lesbian bodybuilder 80s psychological thriller indie film from A24, Love Lies Bleeding. And I also wrote a review here for the historical drama One Life about a British guy who's helping save some people out of Czechoslovakia during World War II from the Nazis. So highly recommend you check those out. You can find the link to the Substack in the description, and you can also just find us at cinemanqso.substack.com. Okay, so let's talk about story number 1 here. So the video game publisher Take-Two Interactive, and by publisher, it's more of like a holding company for a few other publishers. Take-Two is going to be buying the Gearbox Entertainment Company, or Gearbox Software, which is a video game developer. They're going to be buying Gearbox from Embracer Group, which is another video game holding company, for $460 million in stock. And I'm going to kind of explain all those different parties in just a moment here. So the sale is expected to take place by the end of June. So just a couple months from now. And publication Polygon notes that this sale comes amidst troubles for Embracer Group. So who's Embracer Group? So Embracer Group is a Swedish video game holding company. It bought Gearbox Software in 2021 for about $1.3 billion. So they're selling it at a loss at this point. For about half that, or like a third of that. And the reason why Embracer Group right now is in the middle of a big restructuring move and trying to cut costs. Just because of market conditions in general, but also it was going to have this huge $2 billion deal with this like Saudi Arabian backed video game company, but that fell through in 2023, and it's laid off like 900 people. So at this point right now, it's really trying to get lean and sell off some of the assets that it thinks will be able to bring in some money, because Gearbox, from my understanding, is like probably one of the biggest assets in their portfolio. And they're selling it now to Take-Two Interactive. So who's Take-Two? So Take-Two, like I said, is another holding company, and their main kind of assets are 2 massive video game publishers. So if you don't know, the way the video game industry works is, it's kind of, if to put it into film analogy, you have a production company that like makes the film, and then you have a distributor that distributes the film, right? Sometimes the production company is owned by the distributor, right? But that's kind of how it works. Video games is basically the same thing, though instead of production company, you would say developer, and instead of distributor, you would say publisher. So Take-Two owns 2 really important publishers. You have Rockstar Games, very, very successful publisher, notably for the Red Dead Redemption series, which is obviously a huge seller. But the biggest one is obviously Grand Theft Auto. And I think Grand Theft Auto 5 is like the highest selling game of all time, just because it's been like re-released a bunch of times. And now people are super hyped about Grand Theft Auto 6 coming out, presumably in a few years, hopefully. So Rockstar is obviously is like the crown jewel of Take-Two's portfolio. Huge moneymaker, especially Grand Theft Auto, because they've had a very successful live service component. So that's just bringing in money all the time, right? So that's Rockstar. And then Take-Two also owns the publisher 2K. And 2K is not necessarily as successful as Rockstar, but is a lot more diversified. So not only does 2K publish, like they have 2K, like NBA 2K, like sports series, they also are the publishers and owner of the BioShock video game series, which is fairly dormant, but that's obviously a very influential game series. And they also publish Borderlands, the Borderlands series. Now, who makes Borderlands? Gearbox, right? So that's kind of the relationship there. So Gearbox, they've done a lot of stuff, but their primary claim to fame is of creating and making the Borderlands games published by 2K. And currently the studio reportedly has about 6 projects in the works right now, 2 of which are sequels, and one of those sequels being a sequel to Borderlands. So there's definitely stuff in motion right now that Take-Two would now be kind of taking on, if you will. We have a statement here from Take-Two saying, quote, say Take-Two 5 times fast. I feel like I've said it so many times now already. But the quote is, quote, Take-Two will acquire Gearbox's extensive portfolio of intellectual property, including full ownership of the critically and commercially acclaimed Borderlands and Tiny Tina's Wonderlands franchises, which I guess is like a spinoff of Borderlands, as well as Homeworld, Risk of Rain, Brothers in Arms, Duke Nukem, and Gearbox's future pipeline, end quote. So yeah, so you're not only getting Borderlands with this, but you're getting all this other IP that Gearbox kind of has ownership of. So like Brothers in Arms was like, I think like a military kind of strategy video game series. I think it's semi-dormant. Duke Nukem is like obviously a very infamous video game franchise that people loved in the 90s, and then they tried to resurrect it like when I was a teenager, and it was awful. I never played it, but it was supposedly like one of the worst games ever made. So when you make an acquisition like this, you're getting not only games that they're working on, but also just all of the intellectual property that they have the rights to, right? And again, yeah, this acquisition just adds another notch in Take-Two's belt. Because again, they have Rockstar, they have 2K, and Gearbox, Borderlands, I've never played Borderlands, and I don't know how beloved it is, but it's really become one of those staple franchises in the industry. And the series has sold over 75 million copies across all the different installments and spin-offs. And a movie version is coming out this August. And it's like, has like Cate Blanchett in it, right? So this is like a pretty good time to get into the Borderlands business if you're Take-Two Interactive, right? But overall, this reflects, further consolidation in the games industry, which I've talked about on this channel many times, and nor am I the first, and it's been happening for a long time now. Microsoft buying Activision Blizzard and buying Bethesda, and then you have Sony buying Bungie. So you have all of these publishers and console manufacturers gobbling up all of the different publishers and mainstream developers. So this story in of itself isn't necessarily like breaking news, because again, with 2K, who's been publishing Borderlands, and Gearbox, I think, would now be under 2K officially now. So this isn't really like shocking developments. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this story is because it reflects that further consolidation that you're seeing across all different entertainment spheres. We talk about it in the film industry all the time. But the question will be, what will the effect be of all of this consolidation and, fewer and fewer competitors? I think the reaction to when an industry gets too big is the industry implodes. There's a renaissance or revival or emergence of a strong indie kind of voice or presence, or both. And usually they coincide, right? So I am all fine with consolidation if it means that these studios will just get so bloated that people will turn to indie gaming. And that's not to say indie gaming isn't really prevalent. Like, it's very, very prevalent. Really started off when I was like in middle school, like kind of like in the late 2000s, like early 2010s. I remember like seeing like a panel on Xbox Live for indie games, and I never heard indie. Like, I knew independent films. I never heard indie films yet, at least. So I thought it had to do like with India. So I was like, oh, a whole category of just games from India. That's interesting. And then I eventually realized it meant indie games. So yeah, it'll be interesting. And again, sometimes, at least, especially in the games industry, sometimes acquisitions are actually a good thing because it helps secure resources and funding that some of these studios maybe would not have, right? I know there's the studio Double Fine who makes like Psychonauts, and they were acquired by Microsoft. And I think Tim Schafer, who's like the kind of head of Double Fine Studios, was like, this was really great for us because then we didn't have to worry as much about money because we had that good Microsoft money just coming to us, right? So, this is a very nuanced kind of topic here, but I think consolidation, I'm neutral on gaming industry consolidation. But we'll see how the FTC feels about this merger. Okay. Let's move on to story number 2. Let me just grab a quick drink here. Okay. So, you got Disney Plus. You got Hulu. Why not put them together? They're all owned by Disney. So, long-awaited development here. Hulu will now be available on Disney Plus after a 3-month beta with people kind of trying out the functionality. So, this would be an additional subscription, right? If you already have a Hulu subscription, use the same email. I think it's automatically going to connect. And if not, if you use different emails, then I think there's still a way to connect to them. You just have to sign in or whatever. But this is not just like a bundle where it's like, oh, you pay this price and then you can sign into the Disney Plus app and sign into the Hulu app. They will still be separate apps, but now there will be a Hulu tile on Disney Plus's homepage where there's like, Disney, Star Wars and Marvel and Pixar, whatever all the different tiles are. There will now be one for Hulu. It will, what do I have here? So if you look at this picture here, so the logo for the Disney Plus logo has now been updated to like a teal-ish color, kind of showing like that combination of like the Disney Plus blue and the Hulu like bright green. So this is now going to mean that Hulu content, nearly all of the content available with your Hulu subscription, will now be available through the Disney Plus app. Obviously, there's some exceptions due to like licensing reasons, and it's not going to have Hulu Plus Live TV, which is like exactly what it sounds like, their live TV functionality on Hulu. It's not going to have that. But besides that, it's going to, like what you would want from Hulu or what you go to Hulu for, you're going to now be able to access that through Disney Plus. Which creates some interesting issues here because, Disney obviously has a certain brand and image, right, of being very family friendly. And there's plenty of stuff on Hulu, both licensed stuff as well as original Hulu content that is, at the very least, like meant for maybe an older audience, if not full on like it's TVMA or it's like adult content, right? So there will be a focus on Disney Plus having parental controls. And they're encouraging users to create, they're encouraging subscribers to create multiple users, right? So you have like Dad's profile and little Jimmy's profile, right? To really try to make Disney Plus a hub for the whole family, which they've been struggling with because Disney, because Disney, at least like forget all of their acquisitions. If you just look at Disney, their output is not going to be the same as like historically as like a Warner Brothers, as a Paramount, just because for the first 50 years they were really specialized. So they would make some live action stuff here and there, but if they were only making animated films, then it would maybe be like take a year in between each one. that might only be like 1 or 3 movies you're releasing in the year, whereas like these other studios are going to release like dozens and dozens of movies throughout the year, right? So Disney, it was always a hard sell, even with their acquisitions of Marvel and Lucasfilm and Pixar and all, and you know, there was always concern how much content could a Disney-only streaming service have, and that's why Disney Plus is also, I believe, at least it was, much cheaper than the other services. Their acquisition of Fox, theoretically, that was like a primary reason that they acquired Fox, was to get like that large library of content. But they haven't leveraged it in the ways you would think. Because again, 20th Century Fox had 100 years of content. But it was not all on Disney Plus. Some of it was on Disney Plus, some of it was on Hulu, and then some of it was nowhere. So you would think, like, why are you sitting on this treasure trove, right? So, you know, now it seems to be they're really trying to make Disney Plus, obviously it still wants to keep that Disney branding, but they're understanding you need to have a lot of content, right? You know, Disney has the blessing and the curse of the limited amount of content, but what is there is so important to people. You know, a family isn't gonna get rid of their Disney Plus subscription, right? Just because like their kids would freak out if they can't watch Moana, right? But you know, for what about everyone else, right? So Disney's strategy here is the way I see it twofold, right? It hopes to use this integration to upsell current subscribers, right? So if you're a Disney Plus subscriber and you don't have Hulu, you know, these content tiles are gonna be there along with everything that you can watch, right? So you might have Toy Story and then The Bear, which is an FX show that's on Hulu, right next to each other. And from my understanding, I don't think it'll be like that. The Bear, that tile is going to be grayed out or anything. It's going to just be there. So then you click on it, and then you find out once you click on it, you've already kind of gotten interested in it, that you actually have to upgrade, right? So I think they're hoping that this will convince a lot of people to upgrade their subscription. And this was something kind of similar with when Disney Plus first launched, because they had a lot of licensing deals with places like Netflix and Prime Video. So for the longest time on Disney Plus, sometimes you would go and see a movie, like, oh, I want to watch this movie. You click on it, and then it would be like not available for like 15 months from now, right? So this kind of feels like a similar thing where it's like they want you to get excited about it, click on it, initially get annoyed you can't watch it, but then be like, oh wait, I can watch it if I just pay an extra $2 or whatever. So that's one kind of strategy. And then the other strategy is to drive engagement up with current subscribers, right? So a lot of people who might have Disney Plus and Hulu may not know what they have access to, right? And Variety notes that, you know, higher engagement correlates with lower cancellation rates, right? So Disney really wants to make sure that people know, hey, you can watch this thing. It normally wouldn't be available with Disney Plus, but since you have Hulu, you can watch it. And the more things that people find that they have the ability to watch, they're just going to be less likely to cancel, right? That's a big issue with some of these services is the churn, right? Like how many people are leaving, not just how many people are we getting. But again, both apps will still be standalone. If you want it that way. It's gonna be, but if you do this, like, again, it's not quite a bundle. It's like literally like you are gonna be using Hulu through the Disney Plus app. With ads, it'll be about $9.99 a month compared to just $7.99 a month for Disney Plus with ads. And then without ads, it'll be $19.99 a month compared to Disney Plus's ad-free version, which is at $13.99, right? So it's definitely a good deal if you have that ad-supported version. For just $2 extra, you get all of the Hulu stuff. And we have a quote here from Joe Early. He was probably always early to things. That was awful. I'm sorry. Joe Early, who's the president of direct-to-consumer for Disney Entertainment, said, quote, Disney Plus, this feels almost more like a voiceover for an ad. So he says here, quote, Disney Plus and Hulu are better together, and they're available for one unbelievable price, end quote. And I'm always usually skeptical and cynical about corporate decisions and maneuvering, but I gotta say, this actually kind of feels like a win-win for everybody, right? This is a win for Disney, for the reasons I said before, because they could potentially capture, it's a chance to potentially capture some Hulu subscriptions, right? And get people who don't already have Hulu on the bandwagon. Because that's been a big problem with streaming is like it's kind of plateauing. Like a lot of people who have streaming have it. You know what I mean? Like the people who are going to get it have it already, right? So this is kind of being able to kind of eke out any additional people, right? But I think it's a win actually for consumers as well, because I've talked about this channel many, many times, how not only convoluted, but unnecessarily so. Unnecessarily convoluted streaming has become for consumers, where you have like 12 different apps and you got to remember all your passwords for all the things, and you got all different apps. And because most of these smart TVs, they run on really shitty OS, it takes like forever to go between apps. It's this whole thing. People want to have a one-stop shop, right? And this adds one less barrier to entry, right? You know, you can have, it's only these 2 apps, but you can have both of those experiences in one app, so you don't have to be constantly hitting your home button on your remote and going to a Hulu app and what have you. And I would imagine, I think I read this, but it's not confirmed, but I would assume that the plan is also to eventually integrate ESPN stuff, right? Because ESPN Plus is its own app. I'm sure if this is successful, they're going to try to integrate that as well. So for an extra, again, $2 or $3 on top of this, you could watch ESPN through Disney Plus. Right. Again, the more that you can just have a one-stop shop for people is going to be really, really important. The only thing that I would disagree with is I feel like I would flip it. Again, instead of watching Hulu through Disney Plus, I feel like you should watch Hulu. You should watch Disney content through Hulu, because Hulu has just been around longer. People, I think, who don't give a shit about Disney, like there's more of like a broad appeal to Hulu, whereas you kind of have the uphill battle here of like trying to convince people that Disney, oh, there's actually stuff for you adults, as opposed to the reverse where it's like, oh, Hulu is for adults, oh, but we could also add stuff, so now it's for the whole family, right? I feel that's an easier sell personally, but I mean, I'm not really the target demographic because we already have all of this, right? We have a comment here from Jacob Boblet saying, at least the decision gets Hulu content off the broken Hulu app. Yes, thank you, Jacob, because I don't know if it's maybe Fire. We have a Fire TV. I don't know if it's Fire TV specific, but the Hulu, all these apps suck. They all suck. That's the biggest problem. The only app that works well is Netflix, and it's because they've been at it for years. Prime Video works pretty well, but since it's tied very much into the Fire OS on our TV, you know, it's a little bit slower than I would like, but Hulu especially sucks so much. And, you know, I constantly have this problem where like, I can't pause anything. It'll physically, like the image will pause, but the audio will keep going. And then if I hit pause again to unpause it, the video will keep going, but now the audio stops. So like the only way I can pause anything on Hulu is literally to exit out of not of the app, but like hit the back button to go back to like the Hulu menu. So it's just a pain in the ass. So yeah, Disney Plus is a little bit better. It's pretty slow, but at least it's functional. Like it's not broken in that way. So you're exactly right, Jacob. But it's the less apps I have to go to, the better, you know. Okay. Let's move on to story number 3. Let me just grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 3. Look at this guy here. I've been doing a lot of political stories lately. I'm not sure why, but media and politics have been intersecting quite a bit lately. So, you know, it falls within my purview. So, the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, mouthful, their board has settled its litigation with Disney. Each side are going to drop the lawsuits that they have, and they're going to work together on new development agreements for the 40 square mile area that encompasses Walt Disney World in Florida. We have a quote here from Jeff Vail, president of Walt Disney World Resort, saying, quote, "We are pleased to put an end to all litigation pending in state court in Florida between Disney and the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District. This agreement opens a new chapter of constructive engagement with the new leadership of the district and serves the interest of all parties by enabling significant continued investment and the creation of thousands of direct and indirect jobs and economic opportunity in the state," end quote. This does not apply to any federal litigation that Disney has against Florida and Ron DeSantis. You know, they still argue that, you know, that DeSantis was violating their First Amendment rights. And this lawsuit was tossed out by a judge, but Disney's appealing. But they're pausing the appeal amidst this kind of legal ceasefire, right? So I just kind of threw a lot of info at you, but you might be wondering, what the hell are you even talking about? So this is part of a long-running battle that's been happening for about like 2 years now, kind of on and off, but this all dates back to early 2022, like maybe February or March, when Florida at the time, whose governor was and is Ron DeSantis, and this was in an election year for him, to re-election for governor of Florida in 2022. The Florida state legislature were trying to pass what people call the Don't Say Gay bill, essentially a bill prohibiting teachers from discussing, topics or things that are inappropriate for certain ages. And the kind of coded language was about like not talking about, like, essentially not addressing the LGBTQ community, right? Which is why it got dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill, which created a lot of controversy, just like in the political world, because, like, okay, what does that mean? Like, it was intentionally vague, or at least opponents said it was intentionally vague. So, like, what does that mean? Does that mean talking about, like, actual sexual topics, or does that mean you can't even talk about, like, if the teacher's gay, they can't say, like, my husband, like, what books can be in the libraries, right? So it created a lot of, it was vague, it was intentionally vague to be, so that it could be used as liberally as possible. Though liberally, not liberal in a political sense, liberal, just like, used as much as possible by conservative school districts and parents who are in uproar about whatever it might be, right? So how does this apply to film, media, and entertainment, you might ask? Well, one of the biggest employers in the state of Florida is the Walt Disney Company, obviously, because of their theme parks in Orlando, Florida. Though technically, I think not in Orlando, but near Orlando, right? So at the time, this is back when Bob Chapek was still CEO of Disney, and this was considered one of his many foibles as CEO during his very short tenure. Kind of not really speaking up until much later, and when he did speak up, it wasn't very forceful, right? So a lot of employees were, saying, like, Disney needs to make a statement and speak out against this. Like, obviously Disney has a very, maybe this is kind of a little flippant to say it this way, but gay people love Disney. It's just, they're a huge part of the community, right? And people kind of felt, and also a big part of the workforce, right? Let's not forget that. So a lot of people felt like Disney had a responsibility to say something and speak out against this. So Bob Chapek eventually did. And again, he didn't really make anyone happy, because the people who were against the bill, felt like it was too little too late and not very forceful and very safe in the way he said it. But then the people who were for the bill were very, upset that Disney took this political stance, right? So you have Ron DeSantis being very critical, openly and vocally, of the Walt Disney Company, being like, I forget what he would say, but like the catchphrase was like, these woke corporations in California really have no business talking about things that are happening in our great state of Florida, or whatever he would say, right? So DeSantis then basically, in an act of what seemed like political retribution, used his power as governor to dismantle Disney's autonomous governance. So Disney, since 1967, has basically controlled the area that the parks are in, called the Reedy Creek Improvement District, right? Essentially, this special governing district was given to the Disney Company in the 60s, which was really important for them as they were building their Florida, properties. And it was very important in terms of, like, they got to set certain permitting rules and zoning rules, and essentially it's its own little autonomous area in the state of Florida. So, like, they have their own, emergency responders, right? Things like that. Like, they're essentially their own little town. And this decision by Ron DeSantis to dismantle this autonomous governance structure seemed pretty, on its face, like retaliation for these public remarks made by Bob Chapek and the Disney, Walt Disney Company. And this was not, just an accident, right? This was being used by DeSantis as, a major battleground of the culture war, which, is obviously a big thing. During his very failed presidential campaign. You know, he accused Disney, like I said, of being a woke corporation and, you know, sexualizing content for children, but didn't really give quite specifics, and we're not really sure, you know, if anything, Disney's content is very conservative, right? You know what I mean? Except for, like, they'll throw in a gay character, but it'll always be, like, in the background so that they can cut it out, so when it premieres in a country that, like has outlawed homosexuality, right? So this was very much like very politically shrewd on DeSantis' part to try to gin up support and kind of raise his profile, and it definitely did, especially when it first started. Because again, Ron DeSantis was just walking all over Bob Chapek, right? But this created a huge feud between DeSantis and the state of Florida and Disney, especially once Bob Iger returns as CEO. And then it got really personal, right? And Bob Iger would say, like, you know, DeSantis was anti-business, right? And as soon as Iger came back, both just him as a person, as well as just his, you know, leadership of the company, that's really when these efforts by DeSantis fizzled out, right? But eventually it fizzled out for both sides. They both had successes and both had defeats, legally and in the court of public opinion. But I think eventually DeSantis, who is still the governor, right? He is the governor until 2026. Not sure if they have term limits in Florida, but, you know, I think eventually DeSantis realized, or someone told him, or not told him, but like really emphasized to him, you know, Disney's really important for the Florida economy. Again, they have 50 million visitors annually. I wish I had the stat of how many people they employ, but I would imagine a great deal, right? But even if you get just the jobs, just the amount of tax revenue that it brings in, tourism, you know, people are flying into Orlando Airport, they're maybe going to other theme parks in the area, maybe they're doing other things in Orlando, right? Disney also recently announced a $60 million. Maybe it's billion. No, 60 million, I think is right. A $60 million investment in their parks worldwide. But Washington Post noted that, you know, Disney's maybe a little more hesitant to invest in Florida because of this. And not only because they genuinely are afraid of, like, you know, like what's going to happen with these conservative governments, but also using that as a bargaining chip. Like, okay, you want to play this game? Like, we're not going to, you know, maybe we were considering building a new park in Florida, but maybe we'll divert those funds to California or, you know, Shanghai or Paris, right? So I think someone, you know, really just tried to knock some sense into DeSantis, being like, you're scaring off our one, like, the biggest employer and tax generator in the state, tax revenue generator, right? So I think that's what DeSantis, you know, that's kind of where he's coming from, and that's kind of why this is clearly getting settled in at least the state issues here. And then likewise with Bob Iger, he's trying to take care of all of the loose ends that the company kind of has right now before. There's a really important shareholder vote I've talked about on this channel before. Huge proxy fight brewing between Disney and Nelson Peltz. And that shareholder vote is happening, I think this week. Like, it's like April 3rd or 4th or something. So I think it's this week. So it's clear that Iger's really trying to, you know, get all of his eggs in you know, or ducks in a row, as people say, right? Trying to, you know, kind of embolden or that's not the right word. Kind of strengthen his position. So, you know, that's one less thing that, you know, detractors can say is an issue right now with Disney's governance, right? But yeah, it's an interesting kind of legal case because Disney's making the argument that this was political retaliation for them exercising their First Amendment right. But, you know, can you prove that in a court of law? And then there is some truth, like, you know, DeSantis' reason was not the real reason, right? The real reason was for political retribution. I think that's pretty obvious. But the on-the-face reason, I mean, like, I can kind of get behind that this corporation shouldn't have this autonomous control as if it's like this little mini fiefdom, almost, corporate fiefdom. So it seems like going forward, there's going to be at least a little more kind of oversight and cooperation with the state of Florida. But this whole scenario, again, this is not necessarily the end of it. The federal case is still on appeal, but this story, this whole saga has been very interesting to kind of explore, you know, what the relationship is between governments, corporations, and politics, right? How involved should they be? And how and when and where should they all intersect, right? I'm kind of the mind that, I'm a lefty. I've talked about this many times. So in a perfect world, there would be a lot more government oversight of large corporations, a lot more taxing of these corporations. But based off the current rule set here, just looking at the status quo and how things are, I think Disney has a point here that they're allowed to say whatever they want about the government theoretically, right? But again, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this with this federal case. But again, only time will tell. Okay, let's move on to story number 4. Let me just grab a drink quick. Okay, story number 4. Do you like the Golden Globes? You don't? Well, too bad, because the Golden Globes will air on CBS now for the next 5 years, as well as streaming on Paramount Plus. So the news comes after a relatively successful broadcast that they had back in January. And successful, I want to put a big asterisk on successful, because the reviews were awful. The ceremony itself was meh, and the host, Joe Coy, was widely panned. In his defense, he was hired only a couple weeks, or maybe it was only 2 weeks before the show, and the jokes sucked, and he sucked, and then he was blaming the people not laughing on the writer. It was just awful. It was awful. But that aside, because people in entertainment and Hollywood and in the business world, they don't care about quality, they care about money. So the ratings were actually kind of solid. So there was I think almost 10 million multi-platform viewers, which is a 50% increase from the previous year's broadcast. So kind of giving you a sense of where the Golden Globes are at this moment here. So this kind of situation is following several years of chaos and controversy. So the Golden Globes for years and decades was originally run by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. Basically a bunch of foreign film critics. And the organization was basically an open secret for a very long time, but they were accused of bribery, right? And, that was a big, element. Because the Golden Globes, they're early, they're always in January, they kind of kick off award season. So, in this modern kind of past 30 years of the modern award season and award, Oscar campaigning, the Golden Globes is an important kind of first step in that journey. So it was very much an open secret that, unlike with the Academy, which has very strict rules about, what you can, what studios and individuals can do regarding Oscar voters, these people in the Hollywood Foreign Press were getting wined and dined, trying to simply butter them up to vote for whatever film, right, or person, right? But then this kind of officially they finally get this accusation, officially. I think it was the LA Times that did this expose in 2021. But on top of that, there was also a lot of criticism in terms of a lack of diversity in the the voting pool, and therefore kind of a subtle racism, right? Just in terms of what kinds of things they would nominate, and things like that. So after all this backlash, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association was disbanded in 2023. And I say good riddance. And now Dick Clark Productions owns and produces the Golden Globe Awards. So NBC had been the one to broadcast the Golden Globes for years and years. It paused kind of doing a broadcast in 2022. It did do a broadcast last year in 2023 to finish out the contract. But CBS then picked it up for this a couple months ago now at this point, in January of 2024, as a one-off. It was really just a one-off deal. And the deal included, less than $10 million plus a percentage of the ad revenue. And the LA Times notes that this is far below the $60 million multi-year deal that the Golden Globes had had with NBC. But now, because of this relative success, it's now they're going to do it for another 5 years. So starting in 2025. So this year did not count in that 5 years. So starting in 2025 for 5 consecutive years, and then they'll go from there. So interesting kind of developments here. Maybe not seem kind of on its face like a big story, but there's some interesting kind of things here. So Forbes notes that this is a gamble, right, for the Golden Globes to make this partnership, because who owns CBS? Paramount. As I talked about many times, but especially just last week, the future of Paramount is very much up in the air. Like, who's going to buy it? Is someone going to buy it? Is it going to get merged with something? Is it going to get sold for parts and all of its assets get separated? We don't really know. So the Globes are entering into it's like entering into a treaty with a country, a very unstable country. It's like, the government you made a deal with might not even exist in a few years, right? There might be a revolution or a coup or something, right? But this decision again, to strike a multi-year deal shows that there's still an interest in award shows or rather the broadcast of these award shows, right? Forbes also notes, in addition to this being a gamble specifically with CBS, Forbes notes that it's still one of the few remaining broadcasts, like an audience aggregator besides football. It's something that lots of different kinds of people watch, right? Now, I think there's opportunities for the Golden Globes to be a lot better. I think because the Golden Globes have always had an air of, like, in contrast to the Oscars, whereas the Oscars was like a little bit more formal, a little bit more prestigious. The Golden Globes, because everyone knew this was all just vanity and just like, trying to butter up all the voters, it felt like it was like what it used to be called, like, Hollywood's biggest party, right? So it was very much like almost like a dinner event. Like I don't know if they're being served food necessarily, but like instead of being sitting in a theater, they are like the Oscars, like a traditional theater. They're all sitting at like tables, right? And the booze is flowing, right? So the speeches that you might get at the Golden Globes have always been a little bit more like you don't know what someone's gonna say, right? So I think so the Golden Globes has always kind of had an air of like kind of being a little more fun, a little more relaxed. I think they should really lean into that. Like, there's opportunities it should be more entertaining. And also there should be more, gimmicks is the wrong word, but people have talked about like trying to figure out how to make the Oscars more successful in terms of ratings, that the Oscars should be almost like the Super Bowl of movies, and how how with the Super Bowl, like, companies will debut like new, like, important like commercials and like a advertising campaign, or they'll drop trailers for the Super Bowl. I don't know if that's necessarily appropriate for the Oscars, but I think it would be perfect for the Golden Globes, right? I think things like that, like making it feel like a little more kitschy, you know what I mean? Making it feel a little bit more like not as formal, I think would really help make the whole experience more worthwhile for the viewers, and that would bring in just a lot more money, because if people know there's going to be a big trailer drop for something, that's going to help your ratings. It just is, right? And you're not going to necessarily tarnish the reputation of the Golden Globes, because the reputation is basically, in the toilet. So you can only go up from here, right? That's kind of the way to look at that. Okay. Let's move on to story number 5. Let me just grab a quick drink. Okay. Let's talk last story tonight. Story number 5. Warner Brothers has signed a multi-year first look feature film deal with Timothée Chalamet. If you don't know what a first look deal is, usually it's made with like production companies. Essentially, it's not that like, let's say you have Warner Brothers and I think, like, for example, Jordan Peele, the writer director extraordinaire, and his production company have a first look deal with Universal. So the way that would work is that Universal is not always going to produce his films, but essentially when he's looking to find a distributor or financier for a film, he's basically agreed, like, I'm going to come to you first, Universal, and you have the option to take it on or pass. And then if you pass, then I can start shopping it around to other people, but you get first dibs, essentially. So Timothée Chalamet has now struck a deal like that with Warner Brothers. So this comes after, this follows their joint success with Wonka and Dune Part 2. Wonka has grossed $632 million worldwide, and Dune Part 2 has grossed just almost as much, about $626 million worldwide. So in like an 8-month span, Timothée Chalamet has starred in 2 films that collectively have brought in like over $1 billion for Warner Brothers. So kind of a big deal, right? This deal will allow the 28-year-old star, which makes me, I'm 27. I can't believe people are this successful. And I'm sitting here doing this show, but I love doing this show. This will allow Chalamet to star It will allow him to develop, produce, and star in new films for Warner Brothers, right? We have a quote here from Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi, who are the co-chairs and CEOs at Warner Brothers Motion Picture Group, saying, this is kind of like their press release fluffy quote, saying here, quote, "Over the last few years, we have admired not only Timothée's commitment to his craft, which is evident in the range and depth of his varied roles, but also his unwavering dedication to give 100% of his time and attention to every project he has made here at Warner Brothers and elsewhere. His collaboration on the campaigns for Dune and Wonka is something we all enjoyed immensely, and the results speak for themselves. We continue to build for the future of the theatrical film business at Warner Brothers Discovery, and are thrilled Timothée has chosen our studio to be his creative home," end quote. The Wrap notes that Chalamet is the first actor in over 40 years to star in the 2 highest grossing domestic releases within an 8-month span. So he's been very successful, right? And he got a $8 million payout for Wonka. And going forward, I think he's looking for double-digit salaries. Or not double-digit, really, it would be 8-digit, octuple-digit, right? But instead of having 8 million, get 20 million for a movie, right? No, but this does raise interesting questions that I've never liked analyses of film box office results or predictions based off of like the stars in the film and how much money those stars have made. How much money the films that those stars have been in have made. Because there's just so many factors, right? And it's hard to say like, oh, it's because this actor was in it. Like if it's a movie where it's like the main draw is this one actor, that maybe is a little bit more defensible. But for Wonka and Dune, I feel like there are other things about those films that made them successful. One of which being Chalamet, but I don't know if you can pin it all on him. So like with Wonka, that's a recognizable brand, a beloved brand, and it was a fairly entertaining family film in a period where there weren't a lot of those, right? And then Dune Part 2, like I've talked about a million times, there's a whole other level, right? So again, but it seems like Warner Brothers feels it's, he's the common denominator between those two. And this deal shows a continuing trend of actors doubling as producers, which has always been a thing, but is really, I've just noticed it a lot more, right? So like, notably Margot Robbie was not only starred in Barbie. I remember when the Oscar nominations came out, people were like, Margot Robbie was snubbed. She's not getting nominated for anything. It's like, well, yeah, she didn't get nominated in the Best Actress category, but she was a producer on the film, and the producers are the ones who would receive the Best Picture win. So she, as a producer, was nominated, right? And also with Warner Brothers, Tom Cruise recently inked a partnership deal with Warner Brothers. Though the details about that are limited, but it's not quite a first look deal from my understanding. But it's really kind of a major sea change, in the era where like the movie star is dead, at least as we understand it, and it's all about the franchise and the series and like the recognizable intellectual property. Actors are realizing like they need to have more control over their destiny, right? So you're going to see this a lot more. That actors need to have that control and create the opportunities for themselves. It can't just be like 50 years ago where you're a great actor and you just get booked and stuff. Or going back 80 years where it's like the studio system where you just paid on a contract. Like you have a weekly salary and you're just in whatever movie the studio decides you're going to be in, right? So I think this is going to show, it's really important for these actors to have a lot more agency over the kinds of films that they get to do. So deals like this where it's not just he has a lot of leverage because he's really successful, but he's going to be developing ideas. So he's not just going to get great offers, he's going to get to find the stories that he thinks he would be good in. So wish him all the best. A little jealous because of how much money he is making at his age, but what can you do? Okay, let me just grab a quick drink here before we kind of wrap up. Okay, looking ahead to the big films coming out this week, we got Monkey Man, the Dev Patel directed and starred action. I don't want to say kung fu, but like action movie. And I've heard like really good things about it. And apparently it had a really tumultuous production history and was like gonna be on Netflix, and then Netflix pulled the plug, and Jordan Peele like saved the film and he's helping distribute it. So that's going to be coming out, and it's projected to make about 13 to 21 million. And then we also have The First Omen, which I guess is related to the film series The Omen, which I plan on trying to watch because I'm going to try to see this movie. That's projected to make about 8 to 13 million. So again, pretty humble. So I'm predicting that films like Godzilla Godzilla X Kong and Doom Part 2 and probably Kung Fu Panda, those are probably going to still hold out because these aren't particularly, huge money makers, it seems. But who knows? Okay, and then before we wrap up, I just want to give a shout out to the best film I watched this week. This is the part of the show where I highlight the best film I watched this week. It could be a film I've watched a million times. It could be a film I watched the first time. It could be a new film. It could be 100 years old. Whatever it is, whatever I watched. And this week is a rewatch for me. The film, the 1992, right? 1992 film, Glengarry Glen Ross, based off of the David Mamet play. If you've never seen this movie, it's amazing. It's one of the best films ever made. It's about these real estate salesmen and the kind of competing and kind of politicking between them to try to make the sale and avoid getting fired. And it's this really compelling, it's almost like a thriller the way it's kind of paced and structured. Highly recommend. It's really great, and it's less than 2 hours, and because it's very wordy, David Mamet is known for really dense dialogue, it just flows. This is not a hard watch, I think, for anybody. Okay, so that about wraps up the show. Just want to give a few shout outs to some other projects I do. So this is not my only YouTube channel. I have another one called Peter Squared, where it's my opportunity to cover topics related to film, media, and entertainment in a more written video essay format. The video I have up now is titled "A Closer Look at Frozen," where I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen. Take a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these two kind of cartoon versions of myself, this young and old versions of myself. You can find that link in the description below. Also want to plug a podcast I do with my fiance Viviana. It's called Now That's What I Call a Franchise. And the show is we pick a film franchise, and each week we go through each film in that franchise, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You can listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Our most recent episode is on the animated film. We're doing Batman this season, so the film is the animated anime film Catwoman Hunted. Like I said, you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find the link in the description below. You can also find us on YouTube, if that's the way you prefer to listen to your podcasts. And then finally, like I said before, I want to plug Cinnamon Q. So it's not just a YouTube channel. It started off as and still is a Substack newsletter where I write written reviews for new films being released in theaters. It would really be a huge help if you could go check that out. If you like to kind of hear my thoughts in a more written format, you don't like all my rambling, highly recommend you go check that out. Hope you all enjoyed tonight. If you could, before you go, please like this video. It really helps with, the algorithm. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. This was my challenge last week. I challenge all of you to send this live stream or my channel to one person. And I don't mean just post it on social media. I mean send it directly to one person. Even you can use it as a joke. It's like, I'm just doing it as a joke. So this guy I was watching said to do it. But if everyone sends it to one person, maybe one of those people will watch and we can build an audience, because I really enjoy doing this and want to kind of get this out to as many people as possible. But that's it for this week's show. Hope you all enjoyed, and we'll talk to you all next Monday. Peace out, guys.